For years, landlords have been painted as the villains of the housing world. Stories of bad evictions, poor treatment of tenants, and greed have dominated the headlines. But what if I told you that local councils, those very same bodies that are responsible for protecting tenants, have been acting worse in many cases, all while flying under the radar? In today's video, we're going to pull back the curtain and compare how councils are handling evictions versus private landlords, and why councils might actually be worse in some cases. You'll be shocked to learn about the mistakes they've made, and why they might be treating tenants more harshly than you think. Before we dive in, do me a favour and hit that subscribe button for more eye-opening content like this. Now, let's get into it. Section 1. Council Eviction Case Study. Let's start with a real life case that highlights just how bad things can get when councils mishandle evictions. A couple, Lisa and Christopher Dunn, returned home from their honeymoon to find they were locked out of their property. They had been living in social housing in Stoke-on-Trent with their 18-year-old son, but when they returned, their keys no longer worked and the landlord had changed the locks. Now, this might sound like a nightmare scenario, right? And it gets worse. The couple were told they were being evicted for abandonment, despite having told the landlord that they'd be away for 2 weeks. The council, in this case, was involved and had offered them temporary accommodation in a hotel, but that doesn't make this right. This is where it gets tricky. The couple were told they were not a priority, despite their health conditions, and they ended up being left homeless for a period. What's even more concerning here is that they had communicated with their landlord about their honeymoon plans and had an agreement to delay eviction, but the council, rather than stepping in and supporting them properly, seemed to act on assumptions. This resulted in a family being homeless and suffering physically and mentally due to poor handling of their case. Now, imagine if this was a private landlord. There would be lawsuits, penalties, and consequences. But councils? Not so much. Section 2. Comparison. Council versus private landlord. So, how do council evictions compare to private landlord evictions? Well, the main difference here is that private landlords can be held accountable through the courts and can face heavy fines and penalties if they break the rules. Councils, on the other hand, have been getting away with this kind of behaviour with little to no scrutiny. If a private landlord were to change the locks on a tenant without following due process, they could face a fine of up to £5,000 or imprisonment for up to 6 months for unlawful eviction. Not to mention they could be sued for damages by the tenant and forced to cover legal costs. This is a significant deterrent for private landlords, but when councils mishandle evictions, there's little consequence. In fact, many councils continue to act with impunity, offering poor advice to tenants and failing to follow the legal eviction process. And that's something that needs to change. Section 3. Other cases. It's not just this one example. There are several cases where councils have been caught giving the wrong advice to tenants or acting outside the law. Let me walk you through a few more examples. Southend-on-Sea Council had to pay £2,000 to a landlord in 2022 after advising tenants to stay put after a Section 21 notice, which led to weeks of delays and unnecessary costs for the landlord. Nottingham City Council were found guilty of delaying eviction after a possession order had already been granted. The landlord, who had followed all the correct procedures, ended up receiving compensation for the stress caused and the lost income. Redbridge Council in 2019 faced consequences after advising tenants to stay in the property despite a valid eviction notice. The result was months of unpaid rent and a legal battle that could have been avoided. Even Croydon Council were caught in 2021 for telling a tenant to stay in a property after a valid eviction notice was issued, despite the landlord following the legal eviction process. These are just a few cases, but they point to a growing pattern. Councils are not playing by the same rules as private landlords, and tenants are often the ones who suffer as a result. Section 4. How councils handle evictions versus private landlords. Now, let's break down how councils and private landlords approach evictions. Both have a legal process to follow, but how they handle the situation can be very different. For private landlords, when they need to evict a tenant, there's a clear legal path to follow. If they don't follow that path, they face fines or even jail time. But once they have the legal right, they're typically quick to act. If a tenant isn't paying rent or they're damaging property, they have a strong financial incentive to move them out as soon as possible. On the other hand, councils are often much slower in their approach. They have more bureaucracy to navigate, and sometimes this means extended timelines for evictions. They may try to offer support or alternative housing, but this isn't always in the best interests of the landlord, who could be losing income due to the delay. Section 5. the legal ramifications for councils. Now, let's talk about the legal ramifications for councils when they mishandle evictions. Unlike private landlords who can face hefty fines and even jail time for unlawful evictions, councils often escape such consequences. However, there are still some legal consequences councils can face when they don't follow the law. Compensation for tenants. When councils get eviction procedures wrong or give incorrect advice to tenants, they can be forced to compensate the tenants for the harm caused. This can include compensation for lost housing, emotional distress, or any additional costs tenants might incur as a result of the mishandling. For instance, in a case in Brentwood Borough Council, tenants were awarded compensation after the council mishandled their eviction process. The council were forced to reimburse the tenant for lost rent and legal costs as a result of the delay caused by their mistakes. Failure to follow legal procedures. Councils are also supposed to follow proper legal procedures when evicting tenants. If they fail to do so, they can be subject to investigations and potentially ordered to pay compensation. Although councils aren't typically fined for mishandling evictions the way private landlords can be, they can still face penalties through court orders or directives from the Ombudsman. Reputational damage. Councils also risk their reputation if they consistently fail to handle evictions properly. A bad track record in evictions can lead to public scrutiny, criticism from tenants' rights groups, and government oversight. While this isn't a direct financial penalty, it can have long-term impacts on the council's ability to manage housing effectively. Legal action by tenants. Tenants have the right to take legal action if their eviction is mishandled. This could be through small claims court or more serious legal proceedings depending on the nature of the mistake. Tenants may seek damages for lost housing or mental distress caused by an unlawful eviction, and these cases can sometimes result in significant payouts. Section 6. Final thoughts. When it comes to evictions, councils and private landlords follow the same basic legal process, but the way they handle things could be very different. Councils are often slower to act, sometimes offering more time or support to tenants, but this can lead to delays and frustration for landlords. On the other hand, private landlords tend to be quicker in following the eviction process, but may not offer the same level of support to tenants. The big issue here is that councils are not held to the same legal consequences as private landlords when they mishandle evictions. There's a clear need for better accountability when it comes to council evictions, and we need to see changes in how councils deal with tenants to ensure they're acting within the law and not causing unnecessary hardship. So what do you think? Have you ever had to deal with a council eviction? Or maybe you've experienced frustrations with private landlord evictions? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video useful, do me a favour, hit that like and subscribe button. I'll catch you on the next one.